Okay, we're about to dive into one of the most incredible, most important, and most intentionally buried stories in world history. It's a story about how the impossible, well, it became inevitable. It all starts with this number, 500,000. In 1791, on this one Caribbean island that the French called Saint-Domingue, there were 500,000 enslaved people. 500,000 souls fueling an empire. And just look at that imbalance. I mean, do the math. The enslaved population outnumbered the French colonists by more than 10 to 1. The odds here were just staggering. But maybe not in the way you'd think, because against all odds, they rose up. And they didn't just fight their local enslavers. No, they fought France, they fought Spain, they fought the British. They even defeated a massive army sent by Napoleon Bonaparte himself. They fought the greatest powers on the planet, and they won. So, how in the world did this happen? Well, to really get the fire of this revolution, you have to understand the furnace it was forged in. So let's go to Saint-Domingue, what they used to call the Pearl of the Antilles. You see, this little island was the single most profitable colony in the entire world. It accounted for a staggering 40% of all of France's colonial wealth. It was literally the engine of their empire, just pumping out unbelievable fortunes from sugar, coffee, and indigo. But that wealth, it came at a human cost that is just, it's almost impossible to comprehend. The plantation system was so deadly, the mortality rate was so high that the population couldn't even sustain itself. France had to constantly ship in more captured Africans just to keep the machinery of death and profit running. And then a spark flew across the Atlantic, the French Revolution. Suddenly you had these ideals of liberty, equality, fraternity in the air, and the enslaved people of Saint-Domingue heard them and saw the breathtaking hypocrisy. So on this one fateful night in August of 1791, during a powerful voodoo ceremony that brought all these different groups together, the uprising began. And into this absolute chaos of fire and rebellion steps one of history's most brilliant, most fascinating leaders, a man who would literally change the course of history. He took the name Toussaint Louverture. Now, Louverture in French means the opening. And that wasn't his birth name. It was a name he chose for himself. It was a promise of what he was going to do. Create an opening in the enemy lines. An opening to freedom. I mean, his story is just wild. He was born into slavery, but he was actually a free man when the revolt kicked off. And get this, he joined the fight when he was almost 50 years old. He was a strategic genius, just running circles around the best generals Europe had to offer. And by 1801, he drafted a constitution for the island that abolished slavery forever. But his success was a direct threat to the entire world order. Napoleon was terrified of this powerful black leader, so he sent this huge army to crush the revolution. And Toussaint, he wasn't defeated on the battlefield. No, he was captured by treachery. They lured him to a meeting with a promise of peace, and then they shipped him off to a freezing dungeon in the French mountains, where he died. But Napoleon's plan completely backfired. The revolution didn't die with Toussaint, not even close. His brilliant lieutenants, guys like Jean-Jacques Dessalines, they kept up the fight. And on January 1st, 1804, they declared independence, creating the Republic of Haiti, the very first free black republic in the history of the world. Now, that should be the triumphant end of the story, right? A Hollywood ending. But the victory, it came at this terrible, crushing price that would haunt Haiti for generations. So after winning their own freedom through blood, sweat, and fire, what did the world demand from them? The answer is just, it's almost unbelievable. France sailed back with warships pointed right at the coast and demanded 150 million gold francs. Just an absolutely astronomical, nation-breaking sum of money. And here's the sickest, most twisted part. This wasn't a punishment for the war. It was a debt to compensate the French slaveholders for their lost property. The property being the very people who had just freed themselves. Think about that. It's the only time in history that the liberated were forced to pay reparations to their former masters. So this debt, forced on them in 1825 under the threat of another invasion, it basically strangled Haiti's economy before it could even learn to breathe. It took them 122 years to pay it off. For little perspective, the United States didn't even recognize Haiti as a country until 1862. The final payment on this freedom debt wasn't made until 1947. Which really brings us to the final big question here. If this revolution was so huge, so world-changing, why don't more of us know about it? Well, the answer's pretty simple and pretty sinister. The story was deliberately suppressed. It was buried. All the slaveholding empires, and yeah, that includes the United States, were terrified. They absolutely could not let the story of a successful slave rebellion get out and inspire the millions of people they were still holding in bondage. But you can't erase the impact. The Haitian Revolution scared Napoleon so badly that he gave up on his American empire and sold the Louisiana Territory to the U.S., literally doubling the size of the country overnight. It inspired freedom fighters all across Latin America, and most importantly, it proved, without a shadow of a doubt, that enslaved people not only wanted freedom, they could win it for themselves. Which brings us right back to Toussaint Louverture. Before he died in that freezing French prison cell, he left behind a kind of prophecy, this powerful image of what he'd started. He said they'd only cut down the trunk of the tree of liberty, but the roots would survive. And he was right. The trunk of that tree was attacked, and its growth was stunted for over a century by that disgusting debt. But Toussaint knew the roots were numerous and deep. And if you look closely at basically any movement for human rights and dignity that came after, somewhere deep down in the soil, you'll find the roots of the Haitian Revolution.